Hi guys, some of you had emailed me asking questions about the delta math on trig graphs, specifically how to find the period. So I'm just going to do a few of these. So the period is basically one full cycle or one full like ride in the wave until it just repeats. So if I can, I like to go from a maximum to a maximum or from a minimum to a minimum. But you can tell that I can basically take this same copy and just basically repeat that same pattern, and that's going to make the graph. So that is one wavelength. So the distance between those 2 points is the period. So between 5 pi and 1 pi, 5 pi minus 1 pi is 4 pi. So the period of this particular graph is 4 pi. All right, let me do another one. So this one, again, I like to try to go maximum to maximum or minimum to minimum if I can. But again, I can tell that that is one wavelength. If I just pick that up, I can just use that one little piece to make the whole entire graph. That one wavelength is the whole graph. So that looks like 15 pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. So 15 pi over 2 minus 3 pi over 2. If you're going to use the calculator for this, do not type in the pi symbol at all. The pi symbol will just be in your answer. Do 15 over 2 minus 3 over 2. I can tell that that's going to be 12 over 2, which is 6. So the period of this is just going to be 6 pi. All right, but basically that's how you find the period from a graph. You just find that one copy of the wavelength, and then you basically just take the two numbers on the x-axis, the beginning and the end, and you subtract them. All right, someone else had asked to do some of these where you have to write the, hold on, yeah, that's the right one, where you have to figure out the equation based on the graph. So what I like to do first is find the midline. Here's the midline for this. So I know since that midline is 6, then I'm looking for an equation that says plus 6. So that narrows it down to these two. All right, from there, I'm going to decide whether it's sine or cosine. So you kind of have to know what their original graphs look like. Sine always starts in the middle, goes up, and comes back down originally. Cosine, on the other hand, has a maximum, goes down, and up to another maximum. So here's my y-axis. That's kind of what I need to look at. This goes down, and then up, and then down. So that looks more like a cosine graph. It looks like a cosine graph that I flipped upside down. It's definitely not sine. If this was a graph of sine, then that first purple dot would be right where that green line is, and it's not. So because it starts at the bottom, goes all the way up, and then back to the bottom, it's definitely a cosine graph, and it's got a negative sign in front because it's been reflected. Instead of starting at the top, it's starting at the bottom. So it has to be this one. Another thing I can check is the B value and the amplitude. So I've already figured out, just based on some of the information, that it has to be the third choice. But the equations all have to be in this form. A, and I'm going to write cosine because I already know this one is cosine, bx plus c. So the plus c part is the midline. So that's how I knew my equation was going to have plus 6. as far as my amplitude, I can tell what my amplitude is once I know the midline. It's however far it is from the midline to the maximum or the midline to the minimum. So from here to here, 6, 2, 4 was 4. And because it started at the bottom, instead of starting at the top, I knew that that was negative. The B value is the only one that's a little bit tricky. The B value is related to the period, but it does not equal the period. So actually, let me erase some of this graph. So I'll say that again, the B value is related to the period of the graph, but it does not equal the period of the graph. So I'm gonna find the period. So that goes from 120 to 40. So 120 minus 40 is 80. The B value, you have to do 2 pi over the period. And that's what you plug in for the B, the number in front of X. So if I do 2 pi over 80 and I reduce that, I get pi over 40. So pi over 40x. So now it completely matches that answer choice that's purple. It can't be any of those. All right, let me do another one. All right, perfect. This is exactly the type of example I was hoping it would give me next. All right, so same thing, I'm gonna look for the midline. So here's my midline, and that's at 200. So right away, I'm looking for an equation that says plus 200. They all say plus 200, so I'm just gonna have to keep going. Then I like to figure out whether it's sine or cosine. So here's my y-axis, and you see mine starts in the middle, goes up, and then to the bottom. So remember, sine looks like this, cosine looks like this. So based on where it starts, that's how I know whether it's sine or cosine. This is starting on the midline. So that means it's sine. That's what sine does. It starts on the midline and then goes up, down, and back to the middle. So it can't be that one or that one. All right, my amplitude is obviously supposed to be 600 because they all say 600. But you can tell because that's this distance in here. From 200 to 800 is 600, so there's my amplitude. All right, so I'm gonna have to find that B value. So let me erase this so I can draw on it a little bit better. All right, this is one full wave. And this is my midline. That's what the exact single copy of a sine wave looks like. From the middle up, back to the middle, down, back up to the middle. So that whole thing, if I wanted to keep making this graph, I would copy that whole thing and just paste it as I keep going. So that goes from 0 to 320. So that means my period is 320. And so I'm always going to do 2 pi over the period. So 2 pi over 320, if I reduce 2 over 320, that becomes pi over 160. So it has to be this one. All right, I think I have time to do one more. All right, this one is good. So I'm going to start by finding the midline. You don't have to start by finding the midline. I just think that's the easiest thing to find. So I like to do it first. So this one looks like the midline is at 0. So it can't be that one or that one because they say plus 400 and my midline here is at 0. I can figure out my amplitude quickly from there. So from there to there is 400. So that doesn't narrow it down anymore because they both say 400 and 400. So I'm going to have to figure out whether it's sine or cosine. So again, sine should start like that. Cosine should start like that. So because this one starts in the middle, goes up, goes down, that is a sine. Starts in the middle, goes up, goes down. And that's one copy. But you have other points, like I can go from, well, it's kind of hard. You would kind of have to estimate on this particular graph if you were going to go from minimum to minimum. Let me erase some of this so I can see the scale a little bit better. It's counting by 40s, so halfway would be 20. So you could probably estimate that that was 140 and that was 220. So 220 minus 140. I mean, and you can use any of the maximums or any of the minimums, but you would kind of have to estimate. But because this is the same exact picture as my original sine graph, that 80 is the period. From 0 to 80 is the same exact thing as my original copy. So I always have to do 2 pi over the period. So 2 pi over 80 would be pi over 40. That's the b. That's the thing that's in front of the x. So it has to be this one. All right, so hopefully that helped. Keep emailing me with questions that you guys have, okay?